The first thing I noticed wasn't the flashing cameras or the sheriff's deputies standing shoulder to shoulder across my front lawn. It was the silence. The same people who had spent months whispering behind my back, pointing at my mailbox, and treating me like I was some wealthy criminal, suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. They stood on their perfectly trimmed driveways with coffee cups frozen halfway to their lips, watching 6 investigators carry box after box from the HOA office across the street. Someone beside me muttered, "This can't be happening," but it was. The woman who had proudly announced to the entire neighborhood that I owed over $250,000 in HOA fines now sat handcuffed on the curb, mascara running down her cheeks, as an investigator photographed stacks of financial records spread across the hood of a county vehicle. Only 24 hours earlier, she'd stood in almost the exact same spot, wearing an expensive white blazer, smiling for local reporters. "You ignored every warning," she'd told me loudly enough for the cameras to hear. "These fines are completely legal. Your property will be auctioned next month." She'd even held up a thick folder labeled "Final Notice," like it was some kind of trophy. I remembered looking directly into the camera. "I don't owe your HOA $1. The reporters exchanged skeptical looks. She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh," she said, shaking her head dramatically, "denial won't help you now." The neighborhood applauded. Some people even clapped. For a moment, I almost questioned myself, not because I believed her, because I couldn't understand how dozens of intelligent adults could accept something so obviously wrong without asking a single question. I had lived on this land for 14 years. Every deed, every county tax record, every property survey, every mortgage document. Everything proved the same simple fact. My property had never been inside the HOA. Not once. Not ever. Yet somehow this newly formed HOA board claimed I owed nearly $250,000 in accumulated fines, late fees, legal costs, architectural violations, landscaping penalties, and community preservation assessments. The numbers weren't just ridiculous. They were mathematically impossible. When I challenged them, they claimed they possessed updated legal documents, proving my home had recently been added to the association. When I requested copies, they refused. When I asked the county recorder, nothing had ever been filed. When I hired my own surveyor, he quietly told me something that made my stomach turn. "This isn't just a property dispute." He lowered his voice and glanced toward the HOA office. "I think someone manufactured an entire paper trail." At first I thought he was overreacting. People fake invoices. People forge signatures. But nobody creates an entire HOA, complete with official-looking documents, elected board members, attorneys, collection agencies, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fake fines, right? Then everything changed with a single phone call. I wasn't calling another lawyer. I wasn't calling the sheriff. I wasn't calling the county. I called someone whose office investigated financial crimes involving forged public records. I only expected advice. Instead, the voice on the other end interrupted me before I finished explaining. "Mr. Carter." There was a long pause. "If what you're describing is accurate." Another pause. "Do not speak to the HOA again." My grip tightened around the phone. Why? The answer chilled me more than the fake $250,000 fine ever could. "Because this no longer sounds like an HOA dispute." The investigator took a slow breath. "It sounds like an organized real estate fraud operation." At that exact moment, someone began pounding violently on my front door. The pounding on my front door echoed through the house like a battering ram. Whoever was outside wasn't interested in waiting. I looked through the sidelight window and immediately recognized the woman standing on my porch, Rebecca Lawson, president of the newly formed Willow Creek Estates, HOA. She was dressed exactly as she always was. Designer blazer, expensive sunglasses, perfectly styled blonde hair, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Behind her stood 3 men wearing matching navy polo shirts embroidered with the HOA logo. One carried a clipboard, another held a camera. The third looked like he belonged on a football field rather than someone's front porch. My phone was still pressed against my ear. The investigator's final words replayed in my head. "Do not speak to the HOA again." I quietly ended the call without another word. The knocking turned into pounding. "Mr. Carter," Rebecca shouted. "Open this door immediately." I took a slow breath before unlocking it. but I left the storm door closed between us. What do you want? She smiled as though we were old friends. I wanted to give you one last opportunity to cooperate. I've heard that sentence before. Her smile disappeared. You've ignored every certified letter, every violation notice, and every collection demand. I ignored fake paperwork. One of the men behind her chuckled. Rebecca didn't. Instead, she opened the thick binder in her hands. You currently owe this association $251,418.63. She actually read the pennies. As of this morning, I couldn't help but laugh. You forged $250,000 fines and made sure to calculate the 63 cents. The largest of the three men stepped forward. This isn't funny. No, I replied, looking directly at him. Fraud usually isn't. Rebecca snapped the binder shut. You have until 5 o'clock tomorrow to arrange payment. Or we'll proceed with foreclosure. I stared at her. She stared back without blinking. For a second, I honestly wondered whether she believed her own story. Then she leaned closer to the glass. You've already embarrassed yourself in front of the media. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Don't make this worse. I simply smiled. You first. She spun around and walked back toward the sidewalk without another word. The three men followed. Only after their SUVs disappeared around the corner did I finally lock the door and let out the breath I'd been holding. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 46 years old, and I own Carter Land Survey and Consulting in Franklin, Tennessee. Funny enough, I've spent more than 20 years helping people settle boundary disputes. I've testified in court. I've reviewed century-old deeds. I've traced property lines through faded maps drawn before electricity reached this county. Property records aren't just paperwork to me, they're history. Every signature tells a story. Every survey marker represents someone's home, livelihood, or family legacy. That's probably why my own property means more to me than its market value. My grandfather bought these 12 acres in 1968. Long before subdivisions spread across Williamson County. Back then, this was open farmland. He built the farmhouse himself, board by board, with help from neighbors who were paid in barbecue and cold, sweet tea. My father planted the oak trees lining the driveway. My mother grew roses beneath the front porch every spring. When both of them passed away within 3 years of each other, I couldn't imagine selling the place. Instead, I restored it. Every floorboard, every window, every inch of the old red barn. People often assumed I stayed because I was sentimental. The truth was simpler. This place reminded me who I was before business, deadlines, and money complicated everything. Every morning began the same way. Coffee on the porch, watching deer cross the back pasture, listening to birds instead of traffic. It was peaceful. At least it had been. Everything changed 18 months earlier when construction crews cleared hundreds of acres bordering my land. Within months, luxury homes appeared almost overnight. Stone entrances, decorative fountains, private walking trails, a clubhouse, security gates. The development was called Willow Creek Estates. At first, I welcomed the new neighbors. Property values increased. The roads improved. Several families introduced themselves. Some even apologized for the construction noise. Then, about 6 months after the first residents moved in, strange things started happening. A survey stake I'd installed decades earlier disappeared. Then another. One afternoon, I found bright orange paint sprayed across one of my fence posts with the letters HOA Property. I assumed it was a prank, until a week later, I received an official-looking envelope claiming my home had been annexed into the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I remember reading that sentence 3 times, then laughing out loud, because in 20 years of surveying land, I'd never heard anything so absurd. Still, something about that letter didn't sit right. It looked too professional, too detailed, too official. And deep down, I had the uneasy feeling that whoever mailed it wasn't bluffing. I should have trusted that feeling. Instead, I made the mistake of believing the truth would be enough. The morning after I received the annexation letter, I drove straight to the Willow Creek Estates clubhouse. It was a massive stone building with white columns, polished glass doors, and an American flag waving above the entrance. On the surface, it looked like any upscale suburban community. Inside, everything felt rehearsed. A receptionist smiled too quickly. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need one. I'm here about this." I placed the letter on her desk. Her smile faded for the briefest moment, before she picked up the phone. "Mrs. Lawson, Mr. Carter is here." She already knew my name. That was the first red flag. A minute later, Rebecca Lawson appeared from a hallway carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Carter," she said warmly, "I'm glad you finally came. I came because someone mailed me fiction." She glanced at the letter without touching it. "No, we mailed you a legal notice. My property isn't inside your HOA. It is now." "No, it isn't." She folded her arms. "Our attorneys disagree." "Then your attorneys need better maps." For a split second, I saw irritation flash across her face before the smile returned. "Would you like to come into the conference room?" "I'd rather stay where there are witnesses." Several homeowners sitting in the lobby quietly looked up from their coffee. Rebecca noticed. She lowered her voice. "You don't understand the situation. I understand it perfectly." I pulled a folded county survey from my messenger bag and spread it across the reception desk. "This is the recorded subdivision plat." I pointed to the heavy boundary line. "Everything inside this line belongs to Willow Creek Estates." Then I tapped another section. "My property is here, outside. Separate parcel, separate deed, separate tax identification number." Rebecca barely looked at it. "That's outdated." I frowned. "It was recorded 3 years ago. We have newer documentation." "Then show me." "I'm not authorized to release internal records." I laughed. "Internal records don't override county filings." The receptionist stared at the floor. The homeowners exchanged nervous glances. Rebecca's smile vanished. "You have 30 days to comply." "I have 0 days because your HOA has no authority over my land." Without another word, I rolled up the survey and walked out. I honestly believed that would be the end of it. I couldn't have been more wrong. Over the next 3 weeks, the letters multiplied. Every envelope contained another violation. My mailbox, my fence color, my barn roof, parking a trailer on my own driveway, leaving construction equipment visible from the road. That equipment happened to be my surveying truck. Each violation came with another fine. $500, $2,000, $5,000. Then legal fees, administrative costs, interest, late penalties. By the end of the month, the total exceeded $40,000. I shredded every notice. Legally, they meant nothing, or so I thought. Then the intimidation became personal. One Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of engines outside. 3 pickup trucks had parked along my fence line. Workers in reflective vests were unloading stacks of wooden posts. I walked across the pasture. "Morning," I called out. "Can I help you?" One man looked at a clipboard. "We're installing the new HOA perimeter fence." I blinked. "On whose property?" He pointed directly at my land. "This section." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Who told you this belongs to the HOA?" "Our supervisor." "Who's your supervisor?" Before he could answer, a black SUV rolled onto the grass. Rebecca stepped out. "I see you've met our contractors." I folded my arms. "They're standing on private property." "No." She smiled confidently. "They're standing on association property." I looked at the workers. "Gentlemen, I own this land." They shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca immediately interrupted. "Don't listen to him." One worker quietly asked, "Ma'am, are you sure?" She pulled several documents from a folder. "Absolutely." I held out my hand. "Mind if I see those?" She closed the folder. "No." That single word told me everything. The workers refused to continue until ownership was confirmed. Rebecca exploded. "I hired you to do a job." One of them shook his head. "Not if there's a property dispute." She glared at me with open hatred. "This isn't over." "It never started," I replied. She climbed back into her SUV and sped away, throwing gravel across my driveway. I thought she'd finally realized she couldn't bully me. Instead, 2 days later, she arrived with someone far more intimidating, a Williamson County Sheriff's deputy. The deputy stepped out of his cruiser, looking tired rather than aggressive. Rebecca pointed toward my house before he even reached the porch. "That's him." The deputy tipped his hat politely. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes, I'm Deputy Ryan Mitchell." He glanced toward Rebecca before lowering his voice. "They've requested that I investigate a trespassing complaint." I stared at him. "A trespassing complaint?" Rebecca crossed her arms triumphantly. "He's occupying HOA property without authorization." For several long seconds, neither the deputy nor I said a word. Finally, he looked from me to my farmhouse, then back to Rebecca. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "are you telling me this gentleman is trespassing inside his own home?" Before Rebecca could answer, another black SUV slowly pulled into my driveway. The person stepping out wasn't anyone from the sheriff's office. It was a man in a gray suit, carrying a weathered leather briefcase. He looked directly at me and said only 6 words. "Mr. Carter, I'm here because of your phone call." The man closed the door of his SUV with the calm confidence of someone who had walked into uncomfortable situations his entire career. He wasn't wearing a badge on his belt or a uniform, just a charcoal grey suit, polished shoes that had seen plenty of courthouse hallways, and a leather briefcase that looked older than some of the houses in Willow Creek Estates. Deputy Ryan Mitchell looked at him. "So, you are?" The man reached into his jacket and produced a government identification wallet. He held it up just long enough for the deputy to read it. "I'm Daniel Harper." He turned toward Rebecca. "Financial Crimes Division." Rebecca's confident smile flickered. "Financial crimes?" Harper nodded politely. "I'd appreciate a few minutes with Mr. Carter." "This has nothing to do with you," Rebecca snapped. Harper didn't even look at her. "I wasn't asking your permission." The deputy cleared his throat. "I think I'll just stand by while you folks sort this out." Rebecca suddenly became much quieter. I have another meeting." She hurried back to her SUV, leaving behind the very deputy she had summoned. As she drove away, Harper watched her disappear around the corner before speaking. "She's nervous." "You noticed that?" "I notice people who leave before anyone asks questions." He extended his hand. "I'm sorry we had to meet under these circumstances." I shook it. "Your phone call yesterday sounded serious." "It became serious the moment you mentioned forged property records." An hour later, we sat around my dining room table. Spread across the oak surface were decades of documents, original deeds, county surveys, tax assessments, title insurance, closing papers, every piece of paperwork my parents and grandparents had carefully preserved. Harper put on reading glasses and examined each document with almost surgical precision. "You keep excellent records." My grandfather believed paperwork outlives memories. He was right. He compared the original subdivision plat to the HOA's annexation notice. His eyebrows rose. "Interesting." "What?" "They copied the legal description almost perfectly." "Almost?" He slid both pages toward me. "Read the 3rd paragraph." I followed the property description until one line caught my eye. "Beginning at survey marker 18B. I frowned. "There is no marker 18B. Harper smiled. "Exact." I leaned back. "My grandfather installed every original monument on this property." "There were only 17. Harper nodded. "So whoever drafted this document copied an authentic survey and invented a marker that never existed because they didn't understand how survey monuments are numbered." A chill ran through me. This wasn't just sloppy paperwork. Someone had fabricated legal documents without understanding the land they described. The next morning, Harper suggested we visit the Williamson County Register of Deeds. Inside the records office, a clerk named Linda greeted us warmly. "Ethan, haven't seen you in months." "Morning, Linda." Harper introduced himself quietly before asking a simple question. "We're looking for every filing related to parcel 47-A over the past 3 years. Linda typed for less than a minute. "That's easy." She frowned. "What?" "There's something strange." She turned the monitor toward us. According to the public database, there were no amendments, no annexations, no easement changes, no HOA filings. Nothing. "That's what I expected," I said. Linda hesitated. "Except..." She clicked another screen. "There was an attempted filing 8 months ago." Harper immediately leaned closer. "Attempted?" "It was rejected." "Why?" Linda opened the scanned record. My heart nearly stopped. It was the exact annexation document Rebecca had mailed me, only this version carried a large red county stamp across the first page. Rejected. Reason: unauthorized signatures. Harper looked at Linda. "Can you print everything connected to this submission?" "Of course." 5 minutes later, we walked out carrying a certified copy of the rejected filing. Whoever had submitted it had forged not only signatures, but the county surveyor's official seal. That afternoon, Harper arranged a meeting with an old friend of his, Margaret Ellis, a retired county surveyor with nearly 40 years of experience. She spread aerial photographs across her kitchen table. "I heard someone thinks they moved property lines. They're claiming they annexed my land." Margaret laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. "You can't annex private property into an HOA by mailing someone a letter." "I know." She adjusted her glasses and studied the fake documents. Then her expression changed. "Oh." Harper looked up. "What?" Margaret tapped the page with one finger. "This seal. What about it?" "It isn't just fake." She stood and walked to a filing cabinet. After several moments, she returned carrying an old binder. Inside were samples of official county seals dating back decades. She placed one beside Rebecca's document. At first glance, They looked identical. Then I noticed the eagle. The wings were reversed. Harper quietly nodded. A counterfeit stamp. Margaret looked directly at him. No. She turned another page in the binder. This design wasn't created by an amateur. She pointed to tiny engraving details invisible to the naked eye. This was professionally manufactured. The room fell silent, because that meant someone hadn't simply forged a few papers. They had invested thousands of dollars to create counterfeit government seals, capable of fooling almost anyone. Harper slowly closed the binder. Then he said something that made every hair on my arm stand up. I don't think Rebecca Lawson is running this operation. I stared at him. You think there's someone above her? He met my eyes. I think you've only met the face of the scam. And just then, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen once, and his expression hardened. We've got a problem. What happened? He slipped the phone into his pocket. The bank handling your mortgage just received paperwork claiming your property ownership has been legally transferred into a mandatory HOA trust. I felt the blood drain from my face. They're trying to steal your land before we can stop them. For a few seconds I couldn't speak. I just stared at Daniel Harper, trying to process what he'd said. They sent paperwork to my bank. Harper nodded once. This morning. How is that even possible? They're escalating. He picked up his briefcase and motioned toward the door. We're leaving. Now. 45 minutes later, we were sitting in the conference room of First Tennessee Community Bank, across from my loan officer, Melissa Grant. Melissa had handled my mortgage refinance years earlier. She knew my family and had visited the farm during the appraisal. The moment she walked in carrying a thick file, I knew something was wrong. Ethan, she said quietly, I'm glad you came. She placed several documents on the table. I wasn't going to process any of this until I spoke with you. Harper leaned forward. May we? Melissa nodded. I opened the packet. Every page looked official. There were notarized signatures, county references, legal descriptions, even a resolution supposedly passed by the Willow Creek Estates Board authorizing mandatory asset compliance. Buried halfway through the packet was the sentence that made my stomach tighten. Failure to recognize the authority of Willow Creek Estates HOA constitutes mortgage default due to unresolved title encumbrances. I looked up. This is insane, Melissa nodded. It is. Harper examined the pages one by one. Then he stopped. There it is. He pointed to the notary seal. What? This commission expired 3 years ago. Melissa blinked. You're sure? Harper smiled slightly. I keep a database of fraudulent notaries. He turned another page. And this attorney, he tapped the signature, was disbarred last year. Silence filled the room. Melissa slowly pushed her chair back. I almost approved these documents. You didn't, Harper said, because something felt off. I couldn't hide my frustration. They're getting close. Harper looked directly at me. They're desperate. That evening, we finally uncovered the piece of evidence we'd been missing. It happened almost by accident. Harper had obtained a subpoena for email records exchanged between the HOA and a private title services company. Most of the messages were routine: meeting schedules, invoices, neighborhood newsletters. Then one email caught his attention. It had been accidentally sent to the wrong recipient before being recalled. The recall failed. Someone had saved it. The subject line read, Parcel 47A, Timeline, my parcel. Harper opened it. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. The email wasn't discussing HOA violations. It wasn't about landscaping or unpaid dues. It was a project schedule, a checklist. Each step had a completion date beside it. Create HOA annexation records. Forge compliance history. Generate unpaid balance exceeding foreclosure threshold. Pressure owner through collection notices. Transfer title after mortgage interference. The final item made my hands shake. Resell acreage to Redstone Development Group. I looked at Harper. This was never about HOA fees. No. It was about my land. He nodded. 12 acres bordering a luxury subdivision. I suddenly understood everything. When Willow Creek Estates had been built, my property became the only undeveloped parcel connecting 2 future expansion phases. Developers couldn't complete their master plan without my land. I'd refused several purchase offers over the years, so someone had decided it would be cheaper to steal it. The next morning, the retaliation began. Someone posted enormous signs around the neighborhood. Warning: owner under criminal investigation. Another sign read, foreclosure pending. Residents stopped waving. Parents pulled children away when I walked past. Someone spray-painted thief across my mailbox. My business phone exploded with cancellations. Clients I'd worked with for years suddenly claimed they were going in another direction. By noon, my receptionist called. "Ethan," her voice was trembling. "There are reporters outside." "What are they saying?" "That you've been running a property fraud scheme." I closed my eyes. Rebecca wasn't just attacking my home anymore. She was trying to destroy my reputation, everything I'd built over 2 decades. That afternoon, Harper received another call. He listened without interrupting. When he hung up, he looked unusually serious. "The investigation just expanded. How bad is it?" "Worse than we thought." He placed a folder on my desk. Inside were corporate records linking Willow Creek Estates HOA to a consulting company. The consulting company was owned by another company, which was owned by another. Eventually, the ownership trail ended at one name, Redstone Development Group, the same company mentioned in the email. "They funded the HOA?" I asked. Harper nodded. "And several other associations." "How many?" He looked at me gravely. "We're not investigating one fake HOA anymore." He paused. "We're investigating a network." 2 days later, my attorney finally arrived. Sarah Whitmore had built a reputation across Tennessee for dismantling complex real estate fraud cases. She spent nearly 6 hours reviewing every document, every email, every survey, every financial record. When she finally closed the last folder, she smiled for the first time. "I've been practicing law for 28 years." She looked around the room. "I've never seen criminals document their conspiracy this thoroughly. So they made one fatal mistake." She held up the leaked project timeline. "This email doesn't just prove fraud. It proves intent." Harper nodded. "Conspiracy." Sarah smiled again. "Exactly." She stood and gathered the evidence into trial binders. "Tomorrow morning we file emergency motions." She looked directly at me. "And the day after that, we walk into court." Outside my office window, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Rebecca Lawson was sitting behind the wheel. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was watching us. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she looked afraid. The Williamson County Courthouse had seen its share of bitter property disputes, but the line forming outside Courtroom 3A that Tuesday morning told me this case was different. Reporters clustered around the entrance, cameras balanced on shoulders. Homeowners from Willow Creek Estates filled the hallway, whispering nervously as they recognized one another. Some had supported Rebecca Lawson publicly. Others avoided eye contact entirely. I stood near the courtroom doors with my attorney, Sarah Whitmore, while Daniel Harper reviewed a thick binder one last time. Sarah adjusted her glasses. "Nervous?" I laughed quietly. "I've testified in court dozens of times. As an expert witness," she smiled. "Today you're the victim." That was a different feeling altogether. The courtroom doors opened. "Bailiff's ready," someone announced. People filed inside. The room filled so quickly that spectators stood against the back wall. Judge Eleanor Bradford entered exactly at 9 o'clock. "Be seated." Her voice carried the kind of authority that silenced an entire courtroom instantly. She looked over the case file. "This court is hearing Carter versus Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, Rebecca Lawson, and associated entities." Her eyes lifted. "Counsel, are both sides ready?" Sarah stood. "The plaintiff is ready, Your Honor." Across the aisle, the defendant's attorney, Richard Collins, rose more slowly. "We're ready." Rebecca sat beside him, wearing a dark navy suit. She looked composed on the outside, but I noticed her hands twisting a pen beneath the table. Judge Bradford nodded. "Proceed." Sarah walked to the center of the courtroom. "This case is not about unpaid HOA dues." She paused. "It is about a calculated attempt to steal private property through forged public records, fabricated debt, and fraudulent foreclosure proceedings." She turned toward me. "My client has owned his property for 14 years. She held up the original deed. "The defendants claim his land somehow became subject to their HOA. Another document appeared. Yet no lawful annexation exists." She placed both papers before the judge. "The county rejected the only attempted filing because it contained forged signatures." Judge Bradford carefully examined the documents. Mr. Collins immediately stood. "Objection." "On what grounds?" the judge asked. "The plaintiff is presenting conclusions before proper foundation." Sarah didn't flinch. "The foundation will come from the county itself." "Overruled." Collins sat down, visibly irritated. The first witness was Linda Chavez from the Register of Deeds. Sarah approached gently. "Ms. Chavez, what is your position?" "I'm the senior recording clerk for Williamson County. Did you search county records concerning Mr. Carter's property? I did. What did you find? No valid HOA annexation was ever recorded. Sarah handed her the rejected filing. Do you recognize this? Yes. What happened to it? It was rejected. Why? Linda looked directly at the judge. Because the signatures and official certifications could not be authenticated. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. Sarah nodded. No further questions. Collins approached for cross-examination. Ms. Chavez, is it possible a filing exists elsewhere? She answered without hesitation. No. Could paperwork have been delayed? No. If annexation had legally occurred, it would be recorded in our office. Correct. Collins returned to his seat looking frustrated. Next came Margaret Ellis, the retired county surveyor. She carried 2 survey plats into the witness box. Sarah smiled. Mrs. Ellis, how many years did you serve as county surveyor? 38. She unfolded the maps. Can you explain the difference between these documents? Margaret pointed to the fake survey. This document references survey marker 18B. She then pointed to the authentic county survey. No such monument has ever existed. Sarah asked, could this simply be a clerical error? Margaret shook her head. No. Why not? Because whoever created this copied a legitimate survey, but invented a monument they assumed should exist. Sarah allowed several seconds of silence. In your professional opinion, was this document fabricated? Yes. The word echoed through the courtroom. Rebecca shifted uneasily in her chair. Then Daniel Harper took the stand. He calmly identified himself and summarized his role in the investigation. Sarah walked him through the counterfeit government seals, the fraudulent notary commission, and the forged legal descriptions. Finally, she asked, Mr. Harper, during your investigation, did you recover electronic communications? I did. Sarah held up a printed email. Is this one of them? Yes. She requested permission to display it on the courtroom monitors. Judge Bradford nodded. The projector illuminated the wall. Every person in the courtroom could now read the subject line. Parcel 47A. Timeline. Gasps spread through the gallery. Sarah read each bullet point slowly. Create HOA annexation records. Forge compliance history. Generate unpaid balance exceeding foreclosure threshold. Transfer title. Resell acreage to Redstone Development Group. When she finished, complete silence filled the courtroom. Even Collins looked stunned. He stood abruptly. Your Honor, we object to this exhibit. There has been no proof my client authored this email. Sarah calmly smiled. I anticipated that. She turned toward Harper. Mr. Harper, were you able to determine who sent the email? Yes. And how? Harper opened another folder. We obtained server authentication logs, IP records, and digital signatures pursuant to a federal subpoena. He looked directly at Rebecca. The email originated from the Willow Creek Estates HOA President's Office computer. Rebecca's face turned white. Collins slowly sat back down. For the first time all morning, he didn't have an objection. Judge Bradford removed her glasses and stared at the defendant's table for several long seconds. Then she spoke in a measured voice. Counsel, I believe this court has several very serious questions. Before anyone could respond, the courtroom doors suddenly opened. A court officer hurried inside, carrying a sealed envelope. He walked directly to the judge and whispered something that none of us could hear. Judge Bradford read the contents. Her expression changed instantly. She looked toward Daniel Harper. Mr. Harper, it appears the federal government has just filed an emergency motion to intervene. The entire courtroom erupted. The courtroom erupted into a chorus of shocked whispers. Judge Eleanor Bradford raised her gavel. Bang! Order! The room quieted, but the tension only grew. She looked down at the newly delivered motion, reading every page carefully while no one dared to speak. Even the reporters had stopped typing. Finally, she looked toward Daniel Harper. Mr. Harper, is the United States Attorney's Office requesting intervention based on an active federal investigation? Yes, Your Honor. And does that investigation involve the defendants currently before this court? It does. Across the room, Rebecca Lawson's attorney slowly closed his legal pad. For the first time since the hearing began, he looked genuinely defeated. Judge Bradford took a deep breath. The motion to intervene is granted. Rebecca shot to her feet. You can't be serious. Her attorney grabbed her arm. Rebecca, sit down. No. She pointed directly at me. He's lying. This entire thing is a setup. Judge Bradford's voice turned icy. Mrs. Lawson, Rebecca ignored her. He's manipulated everyone in this courtroom. The judge struck the gavel again. One more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt. Rebecca finally sat, breathing heavily. Sarah Whitmore stood once more. Your Honor, the plaintiff rests. Judge Bradford nodded. Defense? Richard Collins remained seated for several seconds before standing slowly. Your Honor, he hesitated. The defense requests permission to withdraw. The courtroom gasped. Judge Bradford narrowed her eyes. On what basis? Collins looked toward his own client. Recent evidence presented to this court materially differs from the information provided to my office. He carefully chose every word. I cannot ethically continue arguments based on documents whose authenticity is now in serious question. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. Richard, he wouldn't even look at her. I'm sorry. She whispered something under her breath that I couldn't hear. Judge Bradford granted the request. Rebecca Lawson was now sitting alone. Daniel Harper remained in the courtroom, while federal agents quietly entered through a side door. Most spectators didn't even notice them until they spread out near the exits. Judge Bradford folded her hands. Mrs. Lawson. She looked up. Did your association issue fines totaling approximately $250,000 against Mr. Carter? Yes. Were those fines based upon authority you claimed your association possessed? Yes. Can you provide this court with a legally recorded document granting that authority? Rebecca opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The silence lasted nearly 20 seconds. Judge Bradford asked again. Mrs. Lawson? She looked around desperately. I don't have it, because it doesn't exist. Rebecca's shoulders dropped. Judge Bradford continued. Did you submit forged documents to a financial institution in an attempt to interfere with Mr. Carter's mortgage? No. Harper quietly slid another document onto the evidence table. The transmission records say otherwise. Rebecca closed her eyes. After a brief recess, Judge Bradford returned with her ruling. Everyone stood, then sat. The courtroom was so quiet that I could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. Judge Bradford began reading. The evidence presented establishes a deliberate scheme involving forged public records, fabricated HOA authority, fraudulent financial claims, attempted wrongful foreclosure, and conspiracy to obtain private property through deception. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. She turned toward me. Mr. Carter's property has never been, and is not now, subject to Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. A weight I had carried for months disappeared in a single moment. The judge continued. All liens, fines, assessments, collection actions, and foreclosure proceedings initiated against Mr. Carter are hereby declared void, ab initio, completely void, as though they had never existed. She wasn't finished. This court further refers all evidence to federal and state prosecutors for criminal proceedings. Rebecca lowered her head. The Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association is placed under emergency receivership, pending dissolution. Several homeowners in the gallery looked stunned. Some actually applauded before the bailiff restored order. As everyone began gathering their belongings, two federal agents approached Rebecca. One spoke quietly. Rebecca Lawson? She nodded weakly. We have a warrant for your arrest. She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She simply held out her wrists. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound I'll never forget. As she was escorted toward the courtroom doors, she looked back at me. For months, she'd smiled every time she threatened to take my home. Now her expression held only disbelief. She seemed unable to understand how everything had collapsed. The investigation continued for months. What authorities uncovered was even bigger than Daniel Harper had suspected. Redstone Development Group had secretly financed multiple fake HOA boards across 3 states. Their strategy was simple: target properties blocking future developments, manufacture violations, inflate fake debts, pressure owners into foreclosure, and acquire valuable land for a fraction of its worth. More than 30 families came forward after my case became public. Some had nearly lost their homes. Others had already signed settlements because they believed the HOA had legitimate authority. Federal prosecutors charged executives, consultants, and document forgers in one of the largest real estate fraud conspiracies our region had ever seen. As for me, I never wanted fame. I just wanted my family's land. A month after the verdict, I stood on my front porch with a cup of coffee as the morning sun lit the oak trees my father had planted decades earlier. For the first time in months, there were no cameras, no deputies, no fake notices taped to my door, just the quiet sound of birds across 12 acres that had always belonged to my family. And finally, everyone else knew it too. 6 months have passed since that courtroom verdict, and life has finally returned to something I almost forgot existed: peace. Every morning I still sit on the same front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise over the 12 acres my grandfather bought nearly 60 years ago. The old oak trees my father planted are taller than ever, and every time I look across the pasture, I'm reminded that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how impossible the battle seems. My surveying business recovered faster than I expected. Many of the clients who had walked away returned with sincere apologies after learning the truth. More importantly, dozens of property owners from across the country reached out to share their own stories of intimidation, forged documents, and abuse by people who thought no one would challenge them. Knowing that my case encouraged others to stand up for their rights has been the greatest reward of all. This experience taught me one lesson I'll never forget. Confidence and official-looking paperwork don't make something legal. Always verify facts, keep your records organized, and never let fear convince you to surrender what's rightfully yours. Sometimes, one phone call to the right person can expose a lie that seemed untouchable. Thank you so much for staying with me through this journey. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, a property dispute, or someone abusing their authority, I'd genuinely love to hear your experience. Here's my question for you. If you had been in my position, at what point would you have realized the HOA wasn't just corrupt, but part of a much larger criminal operation? If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories of justice, property rights, and unbelievable HOA battles. Until next time, remember, the truth may take time to win, but when it does, it leaves no room for lies. End.